everyone, and welcome back to the GroupM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Baiman. Today, GroupM's Global President of Business Intelligence, Brian Wieser, and I will take you through some of the key insights and takeaways from Chapter 3 of the latest paper authored by Brian and GroupM Senior Advisor, Rob Norman, titled Media Landscapes. Thanks for joining us again, Brian. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we just dive right into Chapter 3. This one is titled, If Content is King, Who Wears the Crown? And, I found the title to be really catchy and obviously pretty appropriate. As we've seen over the last handful of years, people are watching traditional TV at declining rates versus through SVOD mediums. What is the impact of companies like Netflix, Hulu, and other SVOD services on future business models for content and media?
Yeah, well, it's really transitioned the industry from one where you had these really neat functional silos from the actual content development function to the studio to the means of physical distribution to the hardware to the consumer. And, these lines have blurred far more in the last 5 or 10 years than I think they have over any other time. Certainly, there have always been businesses that had, integrated supply chains, like Sony, for example, probably the best and only example. Maybe historically, you could point to General Electric used to own every piece of their supply chain as well, with NBC and TV set manufacturing as well. But as time evolved, everyone kind of specialized on one thing or another. And then when we come to the world of streaming, what really streaming represented was the opportunity for a content owner in some form to deliver content more or less straight to the consumer. Now, sure, they still have to develop the content. They still have to make sure that all the electronics are in a consumer's home. But these things, there's no more gatekeepers. They're increasingly commodified. And, hey, if Roku didn't want to make Disney Plus available, Disney's gone and built its own devices in the past, and it could do it again. And it's easy, relatively speaking, for anyone to do this. So this idea that, you could be completely integrated across your supply chain really changes, I think, a lot about how we've thought about the industry. And some of this is riffing on this idea that for years, there's been this idea that content is king. I mean, how many times have we heard someone say that? Well, historically, you could point out that Sumner Redstone said that in context of buying Paramount, the film studio. But you know what? If you own a TV station, you could say, well, the content comes through us. So yeah, of course, content is king. If you're a cable operator, you said, yeah, well, but we're the way that people actually receive the content. We're the kings. You could be the actual creative, and you could say, oh no, we're the kings. Well, technically, they all are. And now there could be one integrated supply chain. And so this is a relatively big change, and it is causing, it's probably the single factor which will cause the future of the industry to evolve.
It's really interesting and obviously something worth keeping an eye on. I mean, you touched on a little bit right there, Disney Plus. Another thing in this chapter you discuss is the merger of CBS and Viacom. Speaking of Sumner Redstone, and as well as the launch of Disney Plus. How do you see this merger and Disney Plus itself impacting the current and future media landscape? More specifically, though, are these the media companies of the future to watch, and how are they real threats to the SVOD old hats like the Netflixes and Hulus?
Yeah. Well, the thing tying CBS Viacom to Disney Plus is the question is, will Disney Plus show the way for other media companies who have not yet made as clear a strategic choice, if you will, as Disney has? And in the case of CBS and Viacom, I mean, the two companies haven't come together yet. Right now, they're basically taking, let's say, two separate strategies and kind of mashing them together. But it's entirely realistic to say, well, what if a CBS and Viacom said, do we really need to own TV stations? Do we really need to own Simon & Schuster? Do we really need to, own all these other things? What if we just plowed our resources into something that competed with other SVOD services? Who knows what that would do to their valuation, but it would probably be up. And so, you want to think about those things when you think about the evolution of these businesses. Again, Disney Plus, just by virtue of the fact that they clearly have investment from the top of the company and a focus strategically of the company's resources in this direction. It's the most likely to cause a meaningful change in the months, quarters, and years ahead. Um, but in terms of the impact on Netflix, and again, we keep coming back to Netflix throughout this document because I think that it really does speak to a lot of the disruption impacting the industry on so many different fronts. It's not a given that Netflix is impacted negatively. One of the things about Netflix is they burn a lot of cash. Every year, right now, they're on pace to burn maybe $3 or more billion this year, and maybe they'll do the same next year. That means they need to raise capital, and they're doing it with debt. And it's not clear exactly when they will be cash flow positive. And so they have what is a relatively small business, but a massive equity market capitalization, entirely dependent upon their ability to continue to grow and continue to meet the milestones they're setting for themselves. There's something circular in this, that the second they stop meeting their goals, it's possible that investors just say, "Yeah, no, we're not going to be so thrilled about this," and then it becomes hard to raise capital, and then they can't continue to invest and disrupt the ecosystem. But they've already forced so many companies around the world to invest heavily against this new world that Netflix believes in, to the extent that that makes a world where an SVOD service is more and more essential for more and more homes. Then if others help create the environment that Netflix believes will happen, Netflix becomes more important and builds its business into the prophecy that it designed. So it's hard to say how it specifically impacts Netflix, but it's safe to say that the world of media is definitely pushing towards a direct-to-consumer future.
And that's obviously going to be something to keep a close eye on, and also something that we're going to dive into in a couple chapters a little bit more. Well, that's all the time we've got for today. You can listen to this podcast and all other episodes at our link in the posting above. Tune in next week as Brian takes us through the fourth chapter called The Dream of the 90s is Alive, Convergence 2.0. If you have any questions on this chapter for Brian, please leave it in the comment section below, and Brian will do his best to answer you. Thanks for listening.